Kurdish fighters face the Islamic State around Tel Abyad, a strategic Syrian border town in the jihadist group's stronghold of Raqqa. Meanwhile, refugees fleeing the fight pour into Turkey with the border crossing newly reopened. In Geneva, peace talks between rival political groups in Yemen get underway, while coalition warplanes bombard the capital Sana'a overnight, targeting the home of a Houthi military commander. And Jeb Bush set to formally launch his bid for the White House, joining an increasingly crowded pool of candidates in a race already divided between social issues and foreign policy. Good evening and welcome to the news today. We begin tonight with a continued focus on Syria and these images of a Turkey-Syria border crossing where several hundred Syrians were granted entry, fleeing a fierce fight between a Kurdish-led militia and the Islamic State in the town of Tel Abyad. It's brought the Kurds, who are working with the US-led coalition, directly into the IS stronghold of Raqqa province. We'll look at the fight and the status of tens of thousands of refugees, but first, the latest from Ayman Siksik.
An intensifying conflict in Syria as sectarian tension rises along the Turkish border. Syrian rebel and militant groups accuse the country's Kurdish militia of committing ethnic cleansing against Turkmen in the mixed city of Tel Abyad in the north of the country. Along the border with Turkey, Syrian refugees lined up Monday in hopes to escape the crossfire of the fighting between Kurdish-led militia and Islamic State militants.
Tanks and war jets are bombing people in Syria. These people had to leave their homes and come to Turkey because people cannot even find a loaf of bread there. People are killed there, including women and children.
Tel Abyad, a mixed town of Arabs, Kurds and Turkmen about 50 miles north of the IS stronghold of Raqqa, has suffered a growing Kurdish advance after US-led coalition airstrikes in the area weakened the IS and created a void of power.
They destroyed our houses. We couldn't take anything. We had to leave without our clothes, and we came to Turkey.
Turkish officials said the Syrian refugees were fleeing bombings by the US-led coalition, diverting the responsibility away from the fighting between the Kurds and the IS. According to official Turkish stats, Turkey has taken in more than 2 million Syrian refugees since fighting in the country began in 2011. In an attempt at encouraging hope, UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura arrived in Damascus on Monday. Finding common ground between the parties in Syria, this is de Mistura's official mission. But common ground between the warring factions will be difficult to find, now more than ever.
And to take a look first at what's going on in Damascus in the Syria conflict, with us from the Golan Heights is Hamad Awidat, reporter for Iranian Press TV. Hamad, good evening.
Good evening.
So I want to begin, as I just mentioned, with Damascus, where the UN peace envoy is. And already we hear from the Syrian foreign minister that he supports efforts for a political solution. So I want to ask you, what kind of political solution could the regime be okay with at this point?
I think that this time there's no solutions that can be bring to Syria by politics. And because they are trying to do it until now 4 years, and they didn't succeed, and all the time there's losers and losing all the points and the arguments that they are trying to do, just because they don't accept to sit with each other, and there's a problem between the regime and the opposition side, and everyone has his rules and everyone has his needs, and they don't accept, to give each other any permissions just to use it in the field, which means they need to control the fighting there in Syria. And who's talking about the politics solutions now? I think that he don't know what's going on in the field. The
foreign minister doesn't know what's going on in the field?
It's a big game. It's a big player. It's the time to talk about not to lie and to talk the truth. You know, the foreign minister, he's sitting in Damascus. He's welcoming to go to the fighting areas where the Syrian army is fighting, and where ISIS, and where the Druze, and where the Christians, and where everyone is fighting around, where Hezbollah. You know, there's no politics can control this area. All the world have to work now to do a military solution there in Syria, you know, and they have to accept with the regime, and they have to accept with everyone there, and the enemy now is ISIS, is nothing else.
Hamad, what kind of military solution, if we put aside for a moment a political solution as being maybe overly optimistic, what kind of military solution would the Assad regime be okay with?
The military solution is not to give support to the Syrian army. No, I'm talking about the background that is given to the militants that they are fighting there and to ISIS. One of the solutions that have to be is to close the borders with the other countries like Turkey and Jordan and Saudi and Iraq, you know, and start just to control these mushrooms of ISIS or this cancer, you know, that they are.
But Hamad, let me just stop you there for a moment. If we're speaking about closing the borders, we can't help but think about tens of thousands of refugees flowing out of Syria. If those borders are to be closed, what's to become of all of those refugees?
You know, it's not a business. I can't understand that on the first we are talking about that the borders we can't close, you know, and then thousands of terrorists they are going inside Syria, but because of the refugees, you know, the border is closed. And there in Syria, inside, there's groups that they are fighting the terrorists now, and they need weapons, and someone has to transfer for them weapons, you know, and they are trying just to close these roads, you know, to give them to survive alone, and then they will not have their weapons. They don't have more weapons, you know, and then ISIS can control all the area, and then all the world will start to talk about the problems of ISIS, that they are controlling all of Syria, you know, and then we'll go and everyone will start to work and think that ISIS is controlling all of the Middle East, and then he will be connected to Jordan and Saudi Arabia, and also to Qatar, and also to Turkey, and that's what they are dreaming about, and that's their belief, you know, and that's what they want to do. And this kind of business, also some Western countries looking for this, you know, but the most loser, who will lose after all of this is the minorities that they are living in Syria.
On that note, Hamad, of the minorities, I'm going to let you go for now. Thanks very much for this. And we'll move to speak about also minorities and refugees, which we just mentioned a little bit. With us now from Toronto is M. We'll refer to her as such due to the sensitivity of her work. She's part of an NGO that gets life-saving aid to countries that don't allow the entry of aid and don't have diplomatic relations with Israel. Good evening. Thanks very much for being with me.
Thank you. I'm happy to be.
So I want to begin with sort of what's taking the focus at this moment for a few days now on the Turkey-Syria border. We've seen Turkey's policy in terms of its open-door policy towards Syrian refugees change a little bit, become more conservative. What are implications of those changes on the tens of thousands of refugees there on the ground?
First of all, I'd like to elaborate on that aspect, because it's not only Turkey. It's every single country that actually is able to control her entries is doing the same, although it's not published this way. So Turkey is actually the one and only country who gives the maximum aid to the refugees inside that are crossing from Syria. And you have to understand they face a lot of complexities indoor and screening those people who are entering to their own country, and they face a lot of dangers as well. So, you know, us as Israelis, I remind ourselves that we face the same dangers. And the Jordanian government do not allow the entry of refugees for many, many months now. They screen them very slowly. They allow them to enter very, very slowly. Most of the food passing to Jordanian government and to Jordanian official hands, only to official hands. They do not allow the work of NGOs in their territories. They do not allow the access directly to NGOs, the Syrian people. And it's not the same issue with Turkey. Turkey allowed the NGOs to operate and to work. They care about the refugees' well-being. They work around the clock, and supplies is going in and out.
So looking at the several countries, as you say, several countries are dealing with this refugee problem, not just Turkey. You've been in Syria several times, sort of witnessing how aid gets or does not get to the right places. How would you judge how these countries are faring in dealing with such an influx of refugees?
So first of all, I refer you to the Chapter 7 of the Security Council, because in that exact chapter is the answer for all the neighboring countries, actually. Chapter 7 deals with the definition of crime against humanity, genocide, and actual aggression. Prevention of aid is not a crime. Sad as it is, it's not a crime. And if ever UN votes, and until there's a condemnation against Syria, a clear and cut decision, all the aid crossing into Syria by the UN, which means Israel, from her own budget that goes monthly or yearly to the UN, is the one actually, with all neighboring countries, supplying the possibility for Assad to continue facing and murdering his own children and women.
It's a
we
reminder.
need to understand because the aid that is passing from all neighboring countries to the UN crosses to Syria and to the Red Crescent, Syrian Red Crescent's hands. And Syrian Red Crescent, let's be clear, is the government.
It's a reminder that it's a reminder that what's written in the UN Charter is often not what actually is happening on the ground. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. And moving from this conflict to Geneva in Saudi Arabia, where the conflict in Yemen is in focus, rival factions are gathering in Geneva for peace talks, and already Yemen's foreign minister has ruled out a truce unless Houthi rebels withdraw. Meanwhile, a senior Iranian official is in Saudi Arabia on the same issue. Correspondent Eli Ochenberg explains.
Ahead of the holy month of Ramadan, another attempt to reach a humanitarian ceasefire in Yemen was launched Monday, with UN-brokered peace talks starting in Geneva.
I have emphasized the importance of having this another humanitarian pause at least 2 weeks. The Ramadan begins after 2 days. Ramadan traditionally is a period where people pray for peace, reflection, and harmony, reconciliation. So people of Yemen should be able to enjoy this kind of a peace.
Representatives from Yemen's exiled government, the Houthi rebels, former President Ali Abdullah Saleh's General People Congress, and other opposition groups are expected to attend the talks, but the delegation representing the Houthis was late arriving in Geneva.
This is purely logistical issues that representatives of Houthis and other groupings were not able to arrive yesterday. And I'm expecting that they will be arriving late this afternoon or early this evening.
Yemeni Foreign Minister Riyad Yassin Abdullah, part of President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi's government, expressed willingness to discuss a limited ceasefire with the Houthis, but only if the Iran-backed militia withdrew from cities, released more than 6,000 prisoners, and complied with a UN resolution.
Ceasefire for what? If they are still occupying Yemen, if they are still killing innocent people, if they are still destroying everything, what kind of ceasefire? We give them a chance before a couple of weeks, for 6 days, and they use it to exaggerate their offense attacks against the civilians.
The Geneva talks will last between 2 to 3 days, as on Tuesday, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister for Middle East Affairs is expected to discuss the conflict at a meeting of the Pan-Islamic Organization of Islamic Cooperation, hosted by its regional rival Saudi Arabia, both backing opposing sides in the 3-month-old bloody conflict.
And with me here in the studio is senior Middle East analyst Ali Waqid. Ali, good evening. So out of these talks in Geneva, we already hear no truce until the Houthis withdraw. It's something we've heard before. How likely is that?
Nurit, we should understand that for the Saudis, it is not a local war in which they intervene. For the Saudis, it is not even a strategic conflict, a strategic issue. It is an existential issue, an existential threat presented to the Saudis by the Iranians, and the Saudis consider the Iranian file, the Yemenite file, as a key method, a key message that should be sent to Iran, and the Saudis have no intention to give up in any way. It is a zero-sum game.
So neither side has any intention of giving up, of making any concessions?
Yes, maybe tactically, because of the Ramadan, the month of the holy month of fasting, they will reach a formula that will allow the Yemenis to enjoy some humanitarian truce for the coming days, and hopefully for the whole month of Ramadan that will start in 2 or 3 days. But at the long long term. And the Saudis made it very clear, as long as the Iranians show no sign that they are accepting to withdraw and to cease intervening in the Yemenite file and supporting the Houthis, they will keep fighting. The Saudis are not excluding, in their accounts, are not excluding a direct confrontation with Iran in Yemen.
So knowing that this is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and as you say that neither side is really willing to budge, today we see a senior Iranian official in Saudi Arabia that had to be a tense meeting.
Yes, it is a tense meeting because the Saudis, like 20 or even 30 years ago, during the Iraq-Iran war in the 80s, drew a virtual line that was forbidden for the Iranians to try to touch or to pass, and they, according to the understanding between Saudis and Iranians, Iran should have respect these virtual line and the interest of the Saudis in these lines, and the Saudis are identifying that this line, called the Fahd line, due to the former Saudi king Fahd, the Iranian recently are trying to tempt the Saudis in this line and to challenge them in these lines, and the Saudis are now speaking that Syria and Yemen are in the same package. Syria and Yemen are strategic for Saudi Arabia, and they have no intention to give up to the Iranian. And we can see this policy of Saudi Arabia even in our region in trying to bring together Egypt and Hamas. Hamas, that was defined by the Saudis also as a terrorist movement, is now at the center of talks between Saudi Arabia in order to group all Sunnite forces against Iran.
Another reminder, it's not just about Yemen. It's not even just about Syria. Ali Waqid, thanks very much for being with me. And we're shifting now to Libya. He's been called the uncatchable and the one-eyed, but his real name is Mokhtar Belmokhtar. He's an al-Qaeda-linked jihadist said to have masterminded a siege on an Algerian gas plant that left scores of hostages dead. Now the Pentagon says its initial assessment shows the U.S. strike on him was a success. Shai Ben Ari has a story.
Strikes carried out by American fighter jets have resulted in the death of one of the most notorious terrorists in North Africa, Mokhtar Belmokhtar. This according to a statement released by Libya's Tobruk-based government. An official from the U.S. Defense Department said initial assessments indicated the attack was successful, with Belmokhtar indeed being targeted in a strike Saturday night, though actual confirmation of the terrorist's death has yet to be received from the Pentagon. The attack took place in the town of Ajdabiya, not far from Benghazi in northeastern Libya, and also killed 7 members of the Ansar al-Sharia militant Islamist group who were meeting in a farmhouse, with Belmokhtar also reportedly present. Belmokhtar was a former member of al-Qaeda who split from the group in 2012 to form his own organization known as Those Who Sign with Blood. Belmokhtar maintained ties with al-Qaeda leaders and other regional jihadist groups, however. He was perhaps most famous for claiming responsibility for a militant attack on a gas plant in Aminas, Algeria in January 2013. More than 800 hostages were taken in the incident, with 39 of them killed, including 3 Americans, before Algerian special forces rescued the others. Belmokhtar became a high-priority target soon after.
We promise you we will fight you in your countries as well, and you shall suffer greatly from this. We shall threaten your interests across the world, and we shall not remain prisoners of your various policies.
Belmokhtar was known for his dramatic flair and unique appearance, having lost an eye fighting in Afghanistan in the 1990s. He had been linked to numerous kidnappings and arms smuggling cases across North Africa and evaded capture for decades, earning him the nickname the Uncatchable from French authorities. Another name, Mr. Marlboro, was one for years of involvement in illegal cigarette trade. The U.S. government had an outstanding $5 million bounty on information leading to his whereabouts. Whether that prize can now be claimed remains unclear.
And joining me now is Amir Oren, defense and government analyst for Haaretz. Good evening, Amir.
Evening, Nurit.
So, not clear right now. Looks like the strike was successful. The Pentagon says its initial assessment says so. Assuming it was, how big of a blow is that to al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula?
All such blows are hurtful for the organization, but temporary, because there is always someone new who comes up from the ranks. At times, it only helps the modernization of the organization, and at times it delays for a while. But it's not such a setback that the organization itself will stop operating. And you may remember that even bin Laden, when he was killed by U.S. commandos, Zarqawi and others took over.
Had somebody else ready to step in.
And not only that, but if Al-Qaeda has weakened, Daesh took over. So you never know what the consequence is going to be. But remember that 30 years ago, there was an operation El Dorado Canyon where U.S. planes had to bypass France in order to hit Muammar Gaddafi. Now it's much easier. Now Egypt and the United States are against whoever is operating in Libya.
Since the onset, so to speak, of the Islamic State, or since the renewed awareness of the Islamic State from the U.S. and the U.S.-led coalition, how has its policy towards al-Qaeda changed? Because what was once very intense drone strikes seems to maybe have shifted a little bit.
There are priorities. Al-Qaeda is still right there at the top, but the most immediate threat is the Islamic State because of the branches that we see appearing almost everywhere in the Middle East, especially in ungoverned territories, which is why the United States right now and the coalition, they are now operating in North Africa, they are operating in the Arabian Peninsula and everywhere to block Daesh, the Islamic State.
Just with several more enemies.
Right, and Al-Qaeda, in a way, has receded as a threat to one more terrorist organization.
Who thought we would have seen the day where Al-Qaeda might be a receded threat? I want to stop this for a moment before we let you go. Some news from Israel on cyber warfare.
The Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, General Gadi Eisenkot, has just announced minutes ago that he is going to establish a cyber arm or cyber command, which is intended to conduct offensive and defensive operations and operational planning in any future Israeli operation, military operation. There will also be a cyber dimension, and Israel is right there at the leading edge of those nations who see cyber as another form of warfare, in addition to land, air, and sea.
Israel, as you mentioned, has been on top of the cyber warfare game for a while. Is there a specific event that triggered this change to sort of step up its game, so to speak?
No specific event, but because of bureaucratic haggling between the intelligence branch and the communications branch, each headed by a major general, nothing has been centralized. And this is now an order of the Chief of Staff. Finish your haggling, boys. We have work to do.
This is maybe the bottom line of intelligence organizations and failures, that things aren't centralized. Amir Oren, thanks very much for this. And we'll get back to cyber on a different angle a little bit later in the show. But first, a typical teenager. That's how the parents of the UK's youngest suspected suicide bomber described their son. 17-year-old Talha Asmal is thought to have traveled to Syria in April, along with a friend of the same age from the town of Dewsbury. On Saturday, the Islamic State announced he was at the wheel of one of 4 explosive-laden cars used in an attack in northern Iraq. In a statement today, Asmal's parents said IS had preyed upon his, quote, innocence and vulnerability. And with me now is Dr. Anat Ochberg-Marom, an expert on global terror and marketing. Thanks very much for being with me.
Thank you.
Good evening. So I want to start with these words that his parents said. They preyed on his innocence and vulnerability. Surely not every innocent 17-year-old is susceptible to being radicalized, to leave his whole world behind. He was right in the middle of final exams and to go fight in Syria. What makes a 17-year-old British guy, British teen, susceptible to that kind of radicalization?
Whether it's an adventure, whether it's a kind of creativity or innovation, it's to push the buttons of what makes him to feel like fulfillment, a kind of passion to be killed or to kill. It's unbelievable that he's 17 years old, that was recruited a couple of months ago, but 2 months ago in March, he arrived to Iraq. It's whether he knew where he goes or not. The bottom line is that he's not the only one. There are many others who are recruited through the internet, particularly through the social media, and we have to halt it. We have to do something very, very urgent in order to halt it.
Before getting to what can be done, how much of it is about religion? Because when you describe often here that it's sort of this adventure, and you describe it as sort of something that sounds good to a teenager and is not necessarily closely tied to a religious principle. How much of it is about religion and how much is something else?
He is a Muslim. British teenager who
But surely not all Muslims are interested in
for
doing
sure
this.
not. There are many converters. What I'm saying is that there are the most of the part are the religious core values that are translated differently in different manners by the ISIS jihadi fighters who groomed him through the internet. But it's not only the religious, it's also what I said before, the passion, the way of illusions, dreams, innovations, way of translating what the world it is now in Iraq and Syria or even elsewhere.
So the UK, going 10 years back, has had this problem, whether it's homegrown terror or citizens going outside to wage jihad in Syria and Iraq. They're all struggling to find a solution. And you're speaking often about social media and how it's very tough to actually get in between that teenager and the Facebook page or whatever other page might draw him in. How do these countries even begin to stop that?
There are many ways in order to try to track these Twitters, this Facebook and the other social media networks. But what I'm saying is, let's put it that way. Since October 2014 until now, there are 20% more recruiters to ISIS, jihadi groups in Iraq and Syria. How can we halt it? We have to go through, not artillery, no airstrikes, no tanks could halt it. We have to go through the internet and to do counter-narrative strategies to articulate ourselves, not in negotiation way. No, not that's what I'm saying. What I'm trying to convince the people, the policymakers, to fight ideology with the opposite narrative, the opposite messages that we are posing, that they post against us every day, in each networks.
Are these European governments prepared to do that? Because it's a very strong narrative that the IS is sending.
Right. That's what I'm saying, and I'm going from government to government in each, in the Netherlands, in France, in anywhere, in Belgium, all over the countries, all over Europe, in order to convince and persuade decision makers to do a shift. To make
a shift in thinking,
in thinking, in approach, and to enlarge the approach. Not only political or militarily solutions. There are many others ways to try to cope with and to confront what we have at the moment in the internet.
Well, in any case, certainly getting teams of people to fight this on social media is cheaper than weapons and guns and going to war. So doing that alongside it can't be the worst idea. Dr. Anat Ochberg-Marom, thanks very much for being with me.
Thank you very much.
And we're going out for a 2-minute break, and we'll be back with the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Kurdish fighters face the Islamic State around Tel Abyad, a strategic Syrian border town in the jihadist group's stronghold of Raqqa. Meanwhile, refugees fleeing the fight pour into Turkey, with the border crossing newly reopened. In Geneva, peace talks between rival political groups in Yemen get underway, while coalition warplanes bombard the capital Sana'a, targeting the home of a Houthi military commander. And Jeb Bush set to formally launch his bid for the White House, joining an increasingly crowded pool of candidates in a race already divided between social issues and foreign policy. Welcome back. The ordeal surrounding Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir continues. After he left South Africa despite being wanted by the International Criminal Court, a South African judge sharply criticized the government for allowing Bashir to leave, saying the decision is inconsistent with the country's constitution. I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira has the story.
Right up to the last minute, it wasn't clear if Sudanese leader Omar al-Bashir had left Johannesburg after a South African court ruled that the government should take all steps necessary to prevent him from leaving until an International Criminal Court application for his arrest had been considered. South Africa's government said Monday morning that the Sudanese leader, who attended an African Union summit in Johannesburg, was still in the country, but at around noon, Khartoum officials said he had fled and was on his way back home. Later that day, Sudanese television showed what they said was Bashir arriving in Khartoum. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said Monday that the ICC criminal arrest warrant must be implemented.
I take extremely seriously the authority of the ICC must be respected.
Bashir, who came to power in 1989 in a military coup, is accused of involvement in the Darfur crisis, a conflict which left around 300,000 casualties and over 2 million refugees. Bashir, for his part, sees himself as a peacemaker who helps maintain stability in the war-torn country.
The African Union shall continue to lead and be responsible for security in Darfur, and that the participation of the United Nations and international community, and on which dialogue is continuing.
Pretoria's decision to let Bashir go may indicate a change of policy of South Africa, which now prefers African interests over Western ones. On Sunday, South Africa's ruling ANC party said the ICC, which some see as biased against African nations, was no longer useful for the purposes for which it was intended.
And journalist Andrew Green joins me from Kampala, Uganda. Andrew, good evening. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with the Sudanese president. If we're talking about international law and bringing dictators or leaders in general to justice, is this a failure of the ICC? Is it a failure of South Africa?
Well, I think what we're looking at is a failure to give South Africa the chance to figure out exactly what the legal ramifications were. There are arguments on both sides about whether they were liable to hand Bashir over, and that's what the court was trying to sort out. By him leaving and circumventing that process, we're now not going to have the chance to see what exactly they would have decided.
Let's move to all of the other crises that were on the table until this took all of the focus. Burundi, for example, which we've spoken about here on set several times. Can we say any kind of concrete advancement has come out of the summit on that?
We've not seen much advancement on much of anything. We're waiting to hear what Robert Mugabe, who's currently presiding over the African Union, will say at his closing press conference. But we've already gotten some press statements out about the situation in South Sudan, for instance, which is being pushed, a decision is being pushed until July. We've not heard much about Burundi except some criticism about the president's decision to stand for a third term, but we're really not seeing much concrete come out of this summit.
Another summit, unfortunately, where so far it seems to be a lot of talk. We'll see if that proves to be the case until the end. In the meantime, Andrew Green, thanks very much for this. And to Chad, in the Chadian capital, the death toll from suicide bombs has risen to 27 people and another 100 wounded. The dead include 4 suspected Boko Haram militants who the government believes were behind the attack. Chad's communication minister spoke on state TV saying the militant group had made a mistake targeting the country and that the group would be hunted down and neutralized. And to economy, and the story that's sort of topping all economy stories these days, Greece. The country has been locked in a face-off with the European Commission for months over resolving its debt crisis. It's now in a countdown towards a major default and an exit from the EU. Will Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras make concessions to the EU at last? Danny Swibel explains.
Fed up with years of austerity, Athens has balked at EU demands to raise taxes and cut pensions in order to narrow its fiscal deficit. After an unsuccessful round of negotiations in Brussels, European Parliament President Martin Schulz said a debt deal with Greece is still a possibility, adding that Greece Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis, quote, should not tour Europe to deliver big speeches, but rather do his homework in Athens.
The government in Athens does not understand that it is putting its people into a very difficult situation. And if they don't accept the compromise offers which are now on the table, the bill so far has been paid by ordinary people. I don't understand how a government which is calling itself a leftist government did not take the money from equity owners a long time ago.
But the ordinary people of Athens said they were fed up with the back and forth between Athens, Brussels, and various creditors.
It's a mess. It can't be fixed, because with this government we cannot find a solution. They keep saying different things. They come and go. They fight. Where will this take us?
I blame Europe. They put a lot of pressure on us. How much more austerity can there be in Greece? The European Union needs to lower its demands.
A spokesman for Greece's ruling Syriza party said the country would not back down from its previous negotiating position, while also stressing that the government would not abandon talks. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras said imposing yet more austerity on a country whose economy has shrunk by a quarter in recent years is futile and will only deepen the suffering of Greeks whose living standards have already dived while unemployment soared.
And staying with economy, but back to Saudi Arabia from the I-24 News Economy Magazine, Daniel Roth joins me. Good evening, Daniel.
Good evening.
Big move for Saudi Arabia today for foreign investors. First time it's opening up its market.
Yes, it is the first time in its history, and it actually announced this would be happening about a year ago, so it's taken some time. It's also going to take some time for this to really edge forward, whatever it is they're aiming to do with this. MSCI, for example, is going to take maybe up to 2 years to include Saudi Arabia. So.
First, what does it mean for Saudi Arabia? Before we get to the foreign investors, is this sort of a move to open up in a very conservative country?
Yes, it's a way to open up in a conservative country in a conservative way. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's not any kind of real deregulation. Everything is highly monitored there.
So what will it mean for its economy?
It may mean that tens of billions of dollars, some are expecting around $40 billion in the near term to be injected into the stock market and sort of lift things up, which is a big deal for Saudi Arabia right now. Specifically, of course, they've been staying the course with the amount of oil they've been sending out around the world as oil prices have been dropping, which is causing problems because Saudi Arabia, among other Gulf countries, has a very intense social program for its citizens.
So stopping on oil for a moment, what does this mean for the oil market? Because that must be one of the biggest elements, the biggest bottom line in this change.
Well, this is the big question. It's a big question at the end of the day. What does it mean for the oil market? Actually, no one knows. Analysts have been saying for the last year or so that the oil market will bounce back up, hopefully in the back of their minds saying oil will bounce back up, and it hasn't. Other analysts have been saying, of course, it's going to dip, and this will see the advent of greener pastures, if you will, in terms of the energy market.
I wonder how Iran feels about all that. What about foreign investors? What does this mean for them, now suddenly access for the first time?
Yeah, so with foreign investors, it's really interesting. It's, again, seems like a big deal, but from the foreign investment point of view, this is highly regulated. It's very hard to get into this market still. That it's opened up is one small step in a much broader series of steps that have to happen before foreign investors really take a liking to the Saudi stock market.
So they can get excited about it, but not too much.
Yes, absolutely.
Daniel Roth, thanks very much for this.
Thank you.
We're moving to South Korea, a mix of good and bad news on the MERS virus in South Korea. Over 2,000 schools reopened today, with the outbreak showing signs of slowing, but the country has already also reported its 16th death, bringing the total cases to 150. South Korean president called for efforts to boost the economy against what she called excessive public alarm. And now to the controversy that hit the NAACP this week, namely around Spokane branch president Rachel Dolezal. It continues to heat up. She's being accused by her own parents of pretending to be African American, and as of today, just a short while ago, has resigned her post. ABC's Candace Gibson spoke with her parents.
It's the moment caught on tape that's setting off a national debate about race and identity.
Are you African American?
I don't understand the question.
Rachel Dolezal, the president of her local chapter of the NAACP, was asked by our ABC station in Spokane if she was black, and she struggled to answer.
Are your parents, are they white?
This morning, she's being accused of pretending she's African American.
So maybe she did great work, but now the credibility's not there because we don't know what's true.
Dolezal's family in Montana says she grew up blonde-haired and blue-eyed. One of her adopted brothers, who is part African American, tells ABC News exclusively that she's living a lie.
She took me aside when I was over there and told me to make sure that no one found out where she was actually from, and for me not to blow her cover.
Her other adopted brother says she's had to work at it, changing her looks too.
Start out with the hair, and then she'd have, you know, probably a little darker tan. And it was very progressive.
Without question, she identifies as African American, attending historically black Howard University on scholarship and lecturing on Africana studies at Eastern Washington University. But city authorities are now investigating her for this, allegedly misidentifying her race on a government application.
I actually don't like the term African American. I prefer black. You know, if I was asked, I would definitely say that yes, I do consider myself to be black.
On Facebook, she described this man in the photo as her father, but this morning it's clear he's not blood. A meeting tonight of the local NAACP to discuss the issue has been canceled. Steve Osunzami, ABC News, Atlanta.
Moving to the race for the White House, it's about to get a bit more crowded. In just about an hour in Miami, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush is set to make his bid official. Does he have what it takes? Shai Ben-Ari has a closer look.
The most anticipated participant in this race will be one of the last to join. Jeb Bush is set to announce his official candidacy for U.S. President later Monday in Miami, though he's effectively been campaigning for months now. The former Florida governor was once seen as the overriding favorite for the Republican nomination, thanks to a successful record at state level, as well as the Bush family's network of allies in the political and financial fields. But it seems his support base has eroded over the past few months. While some in the Bush camp were expecting an open road to the Republican ticket, most now see this battle as a long one that could get dirty, with 10 other Republicans having already announced their candidacy. Seen as a relative moderate, it is unsurprising that Bush, the son of one former president and younger brother of another, has had problems raising support among the GOP's right wing. More troubling from his point of view is a lack of enthusiasm many analysts note among centrist voters. A number of polls show him doing no better than Marco Rubio and Scott Walker against Hillary Clinton, seen as the probable Democratic candidate. Bush has focused many of his statements so far on attacking Clinton's time in the State Department.
Egypt, we got it wrong 3 times in a row in the last few years. Jordan, the king comes asking for support. I've yet to see. Perhaps it went covertly, but I haven't heard anything. Israel, for sure. Turkey, all of these countries have doubts about America.
Some of the candidates' advisors have been repeating the mantra of let Jeb be Jeb in recent weeks, emphasizing Bush's ability to win over voters by showcasing his softer, more accessible side. A lesson learned too late by the GOP's failed 2012 nominee Mitt Romney. Some sides are expected to be less publicized, however. This campaign poster notably omits Bush's last name, which many see as a political burden. Indeed, the other 2 President Bushes were predicted to be absent from Monday's announcement event, but the candidate's Mexican-born wife Columba will be there, a major asset as the Republicans aim to make strides in the Hispanic community. Jeb Bush's chances may not look as good as they did a few months ago, but this battle will only really begin in 2016.
And to look at the battle that is about to begin, with me is Dov Lippman, former member of the Israeli parliament of the Yesh Atid party. Good evening.
Good to be
Thanks
here.
very much for being with me. And news desk editor here at I-24 News, Charles Biblazer. Good evening. Before we get to the greater picture and to Hillary, of course, Jeb. As we just saw on the campaign sign, it's just Jeb. Is he going to be able to escape that tag on his name? You have 2 major candidates. The number one thing they need to do is escape their last name.
I think it's going to be very difficult for him to do this. I think he's starting with his announcement today very much behind. When you hear the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, saying, I wasn't planning on running because I thought that Jeb Bush was going to run away with this. But now all of a sudden I see that the field is open and therefore I'm throwing my hat into the ring.
Not a good sign.
It's not a good sign. It's very indicative. You look at the polling. So in Iowa, where it's more conservative, fine, we understand that. But in New Hampshire, where it should be a knockout for a moderate like Jeb Bush, and it's not, the field is very much wide open.
You see, actually, there's this latest ABC News Washington Post poll. 45% of Americans view Hillary Clinton favorably, less so Jeb Bush, yet they trust Bush more. They view him as being more honest and trustworthy. Who are his supporters?
True. There was actually a CNN ORC poll a couple of weeks ago that found that 50% of Americans do not trust Hillary Clinton. In terms of trusting Jeb Bush, that's another issue altogether. Obviously, he had a very successful 2 terms as the governor of Florida. I think that things are looking a little bit in his favor, to be honest with you. There was another poll recently that found that he outpolled Obama in terms of favorability rating. So that was very exciting for him, obviously. But in terms of his campaign...
It's a pretty low bar at this point in his presidency, but still impressive in such a crowded field.
Yes, absolutely. But again, he was supposed to be like a front runner out front. It's really hurting him in terms of his super PAC being able to earn some money. They wanted $100 million. They're nowhere near it. So he's got a long run ahead of him.
If we're looking at the GOP, one of the things that was talked about since the beginning is that the Democratic Party has a clear frontrunner. It's clearly Hillary, and that the GOP, it's not so clear. You have a lot of names in the basket. None of them are really the headlines. Is that still the case? Where do you see it going?
It's definitely still the case. What's interesting is that you would have thought that Jeb Bush would have secured the Republican elite for sure, the moderate camp, and it's not that way.
Who are they waiting for?
Well, they're certainly leaning quite a bit towards Scott Walker and his record in Wisconsin against the unions and against the liberal camp there. Marco Rubio, who, by the way, from Florida as well, who initially, way back, said there's no chance he's going to run against his mentor, Jeb Bush, and now he's running and he's certainly rising. There's a charisma, there's a youth there. I think in the Republican camp, they so badly want to replace the Democratic presidency that they want to get a sense for who is the person who can really defeat Hillary.
This brings me to the question of the Tea Party, because when we see Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, that's always their big issue. Can they really get into the mainstream enough to be that GOP candidate to defeat Hillary?
Personally, I don't see it happening because as things stand right now, they're not even polling well in Iowa. They're behind Bush in Iowa.
Not a good
They're
sign
behind Walker in Iowa. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about the Tea Party and their emergence and whatnot. As well on a national level, they poll even more poorly. So it's not looking good for conservative candidates necessarily, even though the Republican Party has shifted towards conservative. But I agree with Dov when he says that the man to watch right now could be Scott Walker.
Let's look at the bigger picture for a moment, because we've already seen, first of all, Hillary over the weekend, a major sort of official launch, very heavy on the economic and social issues. This is her path that she seems to be taking for the campaign. And the Republican Party, as we just saw in Shai's report, a lot of foreign policy, a lot of what not to do in foreign policy. Which side is going to sort of dominate this campaign, even though it's early?
Right, and I wanted to say, it's very, very early. There's such a long way to go. It's not clear. There's so much that can happen in the world between now and then, and it could be the same way we in Israel. It's very much what's on the headlines when the elections come. Timing is going to be a very big factor.
But you know the U.S. Americans love to start as early as possible. The campaigns start way in advance.
My gut feeling, just because of things that are happening in the world, is that the issue of ISIS and the issue of fundamentalist Islam is becoming such a heated issue. It's possible that despite whatever economic issues are on the table in the United States, that can become a mainstream issue, and that will help the Republican Party. However, that's again where Bush has to come out strong on these issues, and one of his failings has been he's trying to separate himself from his brother and trying to be a little bit softer on these issues.
Yet perhaps support U.S. involvement in Syria and Iraq and across the Middle East.
Well, he has to develop a plan. He has to develop a policy about this, and he's been all over the map on this issue. On the conservative issue, just for a moment, that's also something that hurts Jeb Bush, because his policy on immigration and on other issues, that the conservative camp, which is going to have to come towards a moderate candidate, will have a very hard time coming to him.
That's exactly the point, I think, where Hillary Clinton is trying to get at the Republicans, because by going at an economic and social campaign, if that's how it stays, it seems to be so far, that's sort of the soft spot for the GOP.
I mean, Hillary has two issues. One, she's trying to become a woman of the people, which she's not. Obviously. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that she's being on economic issues and even social issues outflanked by the left. So for example, Martin O'Malley. So for Hillary, really, she has to try and connect with average people, but at the same time, she's also really has to connect with the base of the Democratic Party, which with Obama's re-election, you saw has shifted significantly towards the left, just as the Republican Party has shifted to the right.
And you already see even her views on gay marriage. Back in the day, she had said marriage is between man and woman. That word flip-flop, we're going to hear that several times until November 2016. And now that's a clear part of her campaign.
Absolutely. And people like Governor O'Malley from Maryland are waiting in the wings for that big collapse to happen. Will there be an issue which just brings apart her campaign and they can step in and fill that void?
Well, you know what that makes me think of is Emailgate. For lack of a better term.
100%.
Is that
Benghazi as well.
Yes. Benghazi in the past, now even just these State Department emails, is that enough to take her down, or has she weathered that storm?
I think that to a large degree she has weathered the storm, and I think that there's enough time between now and then such that people will start to forget about certain things like that. I think the problem with Hillary is that she has so much baggage just by being in political life for as long as she has, that there are going to be so many more issues that are going to come to the surface, and it's going to be a snowball effect, and ultimately her own campaign may just collapse under the weight of itself.
Is that wise to sort of, Clinton, who spent years as a Secretary of State, has very strong and clear foreign policy experience. That is right, you know, that tag goes with Hillary Clinton, to stray away from from talking about those issues?
Well, the problem that she has to deal with is this balance between continuing Barack Obama for the Democratic base and going against him. In her big rally the other day, she came out very strong, Barack Obama, and the crowd loved it. But she knows that when it comes to foreign policy, broader America, which is where you have to win the election, doesn't buy it. So
and she has to walk the line to distance herself from Obama on several
Correct.
issues. So we all remember 2008. I remember it very distinctly, election night in a different newsroom. A lot of people thought for a while there, at least, that Hillary was going to take it, the Democratic primary. Could there be another Democratic candidate that might sneak in and be a formidable opponent for Hillary Clinton?
It's inevitable that another Democratic candidate will emerge that will at some point gain steam, just like in every primary season. You saw it with Santorum, you saw it with Rick Perry last year, and then they fell back. The thing with Hillary is she is so far out in front. She's pulling ahead by 50 points on the national level, 40 points even in Iowa. I mean, she's so far ahead right now that I see only really two ways that she can lose the Democratic primary. One, she does it to herself, or two, there's just simply a major gaffe or scandal that emerges.
And it's not impossible
It's
for
not
either
impossible.
of those two scenarios to play out.
Obama
That's
came
why.
out of nowhere.
You're correct, and that's why this is going to be fascinating. But in the end, going back to the way you started, if we end up with a Bush-Clinton campaign, both fighting the images, and it's going to be fascinating to watch. That's for sure.
A lot of reports mirror images. Last point, last time around, in the 2008 campaign, she was very kind of straying away from the fact that she is a woman and could be the first female president. This time, it's been mentioned already. She's more willing. Is that a sort of a card that she's going to bank on this time?
Well, in her speech, she said
It's
she's going
fair.
to be the first grandmother president, for example. I really don't understand why she's not playing the card more, to be honest with you. She's trying to become, like I said before, like someone that is relatable and stuff like that. I think she should be playing her differences more so than anything else.
We'll have you guys back here next Monday. We'll talk about it a little more, see how much she plays that card, which maybe she should, in fact, not stray away from. In the meantime, Charles Bibbles or Dov Liebman, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
We're moving to the UK, to some history. Queen Elizabeth and the members of the royal family return today to the setting where 800 years ago, England's King John accepted the Magna Carta and laid the foundation for parliamentary democracy in the West. I-24 News reporter Danny Swibel explains.
800 years after her predecessor King John was forced, in quotes, at the point of the sword, to agree to the Magna Carta, Queen Elizabeth visited the bank of the River Thames at Runnymede today, where the historic document was sealed on June 15, 1215.
800 years ago, on this day, King John put his seal to a document that would change the world.
After great political upheaval and eventually an uprising by the king's barons, the Magna Carta, Latin for Great Charter, was ratified, establishing certain rights of the English people and placing the monarch under the rule of law.
In 1215, King John was challenged to say that he was not above the law, and that started a very long and rocky road of the history of absolute monarchism throughout the last 800 years. And I think it's right that the Queen, of course, knows that she needs to rule with the consent of her people in order to have effective democracy. And it is only right and just that the Queen joins us on this landmark day.
The document has served as a foundation of parliamentary democracy and human rights for Western democracy, and also formed the basis for the American Bill of Rights and Declaration of Independence, as well as the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 4 original copies of the document, written on a single sheet of parchment about the size of A3 paper, still exist. An original copy from 1297 sold for more than $21 million 8 years ago in New York, when auction house Sotheby's described it as the most important document in the world.
And much attention has been focused lately on the transgender community, on humiliation often suffered, prejudice, and just how open or not our societies have become. Tonight on Insight Magazine, the story of one young man who at 25 decided to become himself, Michelle. Here's a bit of the story from Ruti Shiloni.
From the outside, nobody can understand what it means to be with friends who know nothing, to keep something a secret and then suddenly, boom, to tell them, what you're about to watch may change what you think about me, but I am exactly the same as before, the same person you knew before.
When Michael decided to cross the line, he knew that he would go all the way, not in a tete-a-tete, not by word of mouth, but in a hall full of all his co-students in communication studies. They have no idea that in a few minutes he's going to unveil his deepest secret.
Whenever I'm asked, I answer that it was not at birth. It's impossible. But from the age of 3, as far as I have memories, I remember that I felt that I was a boy. There was no confusion at all at the time. I felt that I was a boy.
And from this to a quick mention of the box office, it's hard to imagine bigger box office opens than Harry Potter, The Avengers, Avatar, but Jurassic World has done it. It's the biggest worldwide opening weekend at the box office ever, raking in $511 million in its debut weekend. That was boosted by $100 million in China alone. The movie was co-produced by Steven Spielberg, who directed the first 2 of the 4 films more than 2 decades ago. We're going out for a 10-minute break, an update from our news desk. When we're back here, we'll look at surveillance in 2015. The privacy versus security debate is getting a little more interesting. Stay with us, 10 minutes, and we'll be back. Welcome back to the news today. Thanks for staying with us. And we're back now with a look at surveillance in 2015. The classic privacy versus security debate has been revived most recently in France, where in early May, lawmakers approved sweeping new surveillance powers, including tapping phones and emails. Now in Israel, a new study out of the University of Haifa shows 53% of Israel's Jewish population would agree to the government monitoring their email account and social media activity if it would help boost national security. And one of my guests in the studio is already shaking his head. We'll talk about it. Brigadier General in the Reserves, Hanan Geffen, is a former commander of IDF military intelligence. Good evening. Thanks very much for being with us. And the laughing one, Professor of Political Science, Dr. Hani Zubaydah. Good evening.
Good evening.
Before we get to what you were laughing about, to privacy, looking overall, it seems that there's always a sort of standard wave of reaction. You have a terror attack, you have a willingness to boost security measures, whatever they may be, the Patriot Act, NSA surveillance, as in the case of France recently, and then you have backlash, as in the case of the US. Where does Israel stand in this spectrum? Because 53% willing to let the government survey emails and online activity, that's a pretty big number.
Yeah. Well, I suggest to look at it practically, because actually I think 99.9% of the Israeli population are none of interest to no Israeli agency, not the police, not the internal security, certainly not the military. And the 0.01% are falling into 2 different categories. One is under national security, and the other one is under public security, public safety. In both cases, the audience, the public, Israeli public expect the government to safeguard it, to make sure that the national security is not breached and that the public safety and the crime is at bay. So I don't think practically there's a question here.
This point that you mentioned, I want to go to you, Dr. Zubaydah. This is the one that's often brought up in these privacy versus security debates, that the people, the citizens who don't have anything to worry about, shouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, but that's not the question. The question is, how come in a democratic state 53% of the people are willing to open their innermost secret issues in front of the government without the government asking them for? It stands even in more contrast to the fact that my fellow here said only 0.1%, which means 10 percentile of a percent are of interest. How come 53% are willing to open their
But
secrets?
we are talking about a society where, if we're talking, this was the Jewish population,
yes,
so a very large percent of
that
has served in the military, a mandatory draft for most of them, a country that's surrounded by enemies, that is sort of brought up with this fear
Well, not
narrative.
surrounded by enemies, because Jordan and Egypt are not our enemies, so we have only
no, but
very
in perception
small,
we have sort of
that's
perception.
Exactly. That's the thing. The under siege mentality, which is the perception of the Jewish people, especially in Israel, and the fact that the Israeli socialization process has completely overtaken the Israelis, thinking that even their privacy stands second to national security. That's the one thing that I can extract from this statement, because any other way looking at it, it's not rational, and it's completely against the logic of any democratic philosophy to agree to the fact that the government can enter into your private realm and survey everything.
By this rationale, does it mean the U.S. is getting more rational, scaling back the NSA's powers?
Well, the United States citizens did not know the depth of the American secret services going into their private life. I think that Snowden and WikiLeaks have completely broken this dam, and now all the Americans are completely against that, and we can see that in their reaction.
Sorry, but I disagree, because the backlash is not really a backlash. I would say it's a minor steps, because actually the ability of the government to enter metadata, which was the case in discussion, the metadata, all the information that was gathered by the phone companies, the service providers, and the government asked after 9/11 the permission to enter it, and through it go and see the connection between terrorists and their links. This is not change. The only change is that the government now has to ask the phone companies to be allowed into it. Previously, they already gathered information, and only after court order they could have entered.
Well, now in France, for example, phone records, emails, all of that is sort of open game, hugely controversial, but still passed it.
Yeah, they passed. All the Western government, Germany, Britain. Britain is not discussed even, because there is no other way the government can control when national security is in question. There's no other way they can control situation.
So this is exactly the question. As a former head of military intelligence, this is exactly what you do. This is your field. The main question behind all of this, before we even get to the moral issues, is effectiveness. Is it effective? So is access to phone records, and maybe you can break it down for us, phone records, email, metadata, is that effective in stopping terror?
Yeah, it's very effective. It's very effective because that gives it's not actually intelligence per se, because it's only the envelope of intelligence, but it gives the investigators, it may be internal security guys, the Shabak or FBI in the US or MI6 in Britain, the ability to start looking for clues, because usually when terror attacks, it's come from an unknown source. Usually it's a surprise. And starting to solve the question is through this.
But we have seen several cases recently in the UK, for example, where a terrorist is arrested or an alleged terrorist is arrested, and after the fact, or actually carries out some sort of attack, after the fact they say, oh, in fact, he was on our list, we had flagged him. There's a gap there.
Yeah, because there is a huge question of priorities. There are so much more targets than the ability to track them that you're always surprised. Even in 9/11, some of the guys were under a kind of clues, or there were some information. But there's so much more targets, objects to follow than the vital assets. Then that happens. That, by the way, is an answer to another question: why these kinds of agency, will focus only on the targets? A civilian, innocent civilian, is nothing of important. You know, when Snowden case was first raised, there was the Spanish newspaper came out. 60 million Spaniards were under the NSA surveillance. Then they say Spaniards are not of interest to the NSA.
So go ahead.
No, I would agree to that, but there's some sort of of course, when you ask the chief of Israeli intelligence, would that help?
Well, that's why we have you here.
He would say, yeah, but I'm discussing a whole different notion of a philosophical argument, which comes from democracy and what are the basis of democracy.
This is exactly the point I wanted to ask you. How linked is a population's willingness to have this happen, if they're even in control of it, which is debatable in itself? How closely tied is that to the democracy?
It is. It is the root of the Israeli inability, the Israeli population, inability and inability to view democracy in the right way. Because when 53% state that they are willing, from their own free will, to open their secrets to the government, it means they do not understand the notion of security. Now, on the other hand, if somebody would come and say, well, look, we're not interested in all of you. This is really just a big scam to make you all scared and be afraid of the intelligence services. But we are interested in a very small percentile. And when we get to the data, this metadata, we will not use all of the data to track all of you. We're only looking for specific things. That might be a different thing, but this is not what these people were talking about, because I read into it and I saw.
We're talking about Facebook, about Twitter, about their Gmail
Facebook,
accounts.
email, Gmail, Twitter, and so on and so forth. I do not need anybody to track my activity, although I know some will. I have followers and so on and so forth. But the notion is that in a democratic regime, you should be free of the big brother as a macro looking at you. Now, we're not discussing whether you are actually looking at the 99%. We're discussing the question of how come we got to the situation where 53% of the Jewish population in Israel are so well trained or socialized into thinking that this would aid national security. And I think that has to do with a lot of misconceptions of the Israeli democracy.
We have a short time, some 40 seconds. A reaction to that from somebody who's worked in it, very quick.
Well, I have many. I choose one. We trust Facebook. We trust Google. Much of our secrets are there.
We on that will have to end. We trust Google. A very good point. Brigadier General in the Reserves, Hanan Geffen, Dr. Hani Zubaydah. Thank you very much for being with me. And we're shifting to something completely different and perhaps a little bit more optimistic. Many of us never think twice before we throw away our leftover food. But some do, and make sure those leftovers go to the right places. Such are the people from Leket, an Israeli organization, part of the Global Food Banking Network. Jonathan Regev joined them to pick apples for a good cause.
Apple picking is a common sight in Israel with many farms around the country, but this picking is different. The apples picked here are not sold on the markets. You will find them somewhere else.
We don't sell anything in this farm. It's ever since I began it, it was always for charity. That's what makes it fun, actually.
Sandy Kolb is a patent lawyer, but his real passion is found here, in his apple fields. Millions of apples are grown here. None of them are sold. They're all given to those in need.
This is where I spend my money, not make my money.
Sandy is not alone here. When it's time to pick the apples, he is joined by volunteers from the Leket organization, which works to alleviate the problem of nutritional insecurity among Israel's poor populations.
We believe that there's a lot of food in Israel that can be rescued, can be used, can be passed on to others that need it, instead of disposing it and just throwing it away. A farmer might not have use for his crops because the prices are so low, it doesn't make economic sense for him to pick it.
Leket is the Israeli branch of GFN, the Global Food Banking Network. The goal of GFN is to fight world hunger by creating, supporting, and strengthening food banks around the world. The network works in 30 countries and will hold a board meeting this week here in Israel. And board members do not only sit in the office and make decisions, they go out to the field and do the actual work.
We try to have one international board meeting every year, and we do what we call an education day to have this, so that we can meet the local team, see what they do firsthand, understand their challenges, their successes, their problems, and their needs. So it's very educational for the board.
In a world where governments often take off their hands from welfare issues, while global hunger just keeps on growing, it's nice to see that there are still people who give their time, money, and effort to try to make the lives of others a little bit better.
And you just heard him. With me now in the studio is host of the I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev.
How did I make it so fast?
I have to tell you, it's nice to see you a little bit out of the sports box picking apples.
Yes,
a little refreshing.
I have been picking apples.
And now from apples, a man of many trades, to the NBA.
Yes, the series is so exciting. The NBA Finals, and it continues to be. Game 5 was last night. The Warriors won 104 to 91. They're up 3-2, which means if they win Game 6
it's
on
all
Tuesday
over,
night,
right?
it's all over. And we've been speaking about LeBron James. He put on another terrific performance last night, another triple-double. Only this time, Steph Curry finally showed up. The game was tied and closed for up until almost 4 minutes to go. That's when Stephen Curry woke up. That's when he reminded us why he was the MVP of the regular season. 37 points with some clutch three-pointers. There we see one of them just killing the Cavs. And every time Cleveland and LeBron James thought they could get closer, Stephen Curry came in and just nailed the game. Now they're up 3-2, just one game away from the NBA championship.
But even so, LeBron continues to be a star. He's the focus gets drawn to him no matter what.
Of course, and the way this series has developed is that the Cavs have to go to LeBron James because the other two stars of the team, Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving, they're out injured, so everything is on LeBron, and he shows up. The numbers he has been putting
he doesn't disappoint.
They're insane. He's very close to being the MVP of the finals. Even if they lose, I think he will be, because what he has been doing is stellar. Just an incredible performance. It may not be enough for Cleveland to win the championship, but he's been immense, really.
So from stellar to, we like to see you a little bit angry sometimes. You were angry about Argentina yesterday. You're still angry today.
It goes from bad to worse because Argentina, my beloved Argentina, conceded a last-minute goal, which means they did not beat Paraguay. Then what does Brazil do the following night? They score a winning goal in stoppage time. What are you doing to me? Argentina not winning and Brazil winning?
It's very, very selfish of them, really.
Yes.
They're not thinking about you at all.
Where were you? And it started so good. There we're seeing Peru scoring a goal on the 2nd minute with this terrible mistake on the Brazilian defense.
This is a regular thing with you. It started out so good.
Yes. But then what happened? Neymar, of course, gets the equalizer for Brazil just a minute later. And then in stoppage time, when we were sure the game is about to end in a 1-0 draw, we said, okay, Argentina drew, so does Brazil. Not too bad. Then Brazil gets the winner in stoppage time. Good for them. They opened.
I like that. Good. End with a good positive.
Yes. I should be objective.
Not sore loser. Good for them.
Good for Brazil. They started with a win. Good for them.
And last, Prince Harry. I mean, all the focus is on William, the two kids. What can you do?
The two kids. He will be king one day. Harry will not. So what does Prince Harry do? Bid him he does.
Other than going to parties?
Go to parties with Pippa Middleton, but also beating his older brother on the polo court. What can be more important?
Have been quite satisfying.
Yes. This is a charity event in which both royals participate on opposing teams. Prince Harry's team won 5-4. The prince himself scored the winning goal, I think it's called, just before the game ended.
Whatever the Brits call it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the 2nd year in a row in which Harry beats William in this game. So he may not be king, he may not have 2 kids yet, but he wins on the polo court.
All right, Jonathan Regev, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nurit.
And with Prince Harry and polo, we'll leave you for this evening. That's it for us for tonight. Find us back here in the Jaffa Port tomorrow night for another edition of the News Today. Have a great night.